believe it's where are we? Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. I believe we're at chapter 80. Okay. So we're yes, we're in chapter 80, which is it says some of the Melachos works that are prohibited on Shabbos. So it's kind of taking different laws that are he's going to go through a various amount of laws that are prohibited on Shabbos. We're going to touch on some very difficult subjects of cooking, kli rishon, kli sheni. We'll go through it slow. Have a lot of if you can see a lot of tabs open. We'll have to read in some stuff to get some more thorough information. So it says like this: Asir lihishtamish laor haner davar shetzarich ion ktsas. So if you have candles lit, and of course the concern is that you're going to touch the candles and put the candles out or do something that's prohibited on Shabbos, that could be a question of a daraisa, a biblical issue, a biblical prohibition. So asir lihishtamish laor haner. So here the point is, you're not, of course, not going to touch the candle. You shouldn't even get too close to the candle. That requires that you pay attention. To pay iyun is more is like how does he translate here? It's forbidden. It requires concentration. Okay. The Gazra Rabbanan, the rabbis are concerned. Shema yishkach. Maybe you'll forget that it's Shabbos, or forget what you're doing, not paying attention because of the concentration of what you're trying to look at from the light, whether it's to read something, obviously, or to check something. The yata scenario, you're going to touch the candle. Move the candle because of what you're trying to pay attention to, right? You're trying to read small words, etc. The karvas Hashem and al psila, and maybe it's going to bring the oil closer to the wick. V'yischayv mishum maver ushnaim. It says, and then the prohibition. This is the comma should be before. Yischayv mishum maver. You'll be the prohibition for burning or fire-related prohibitions. However, shnayim, two people that are together checking something by a candle, mutarim likros mitoich sefer echad b'inyan echad. If they're both reading the same or trying to look into and concentrate in the same subject, so they're not just doing something separate. Like if one person's by the candle doing his or her thing, and the other one's by the candle doing his or her thing, so then they're not connected. But if they're doing something together, so one will remind the next. If one would try to touch the candle, is Chaveri Askirehu, your colleague, your friend, he or she will remind you it's Shabbos not to do it. So this is talking about candles with wicks and oils. So B'ner Shalanu Shahachelev or Yahashaiva, where the fat or the wax, so basically the candle was used, we said, of types of fats or waxes, Karach al Hapsila, that is wrapped around the wick like a proper candle. So there's those who are noigin lahate because you're not going to really move the oil. It's not shaking anything. It's more of a solid thing. But nevertheless, you shouldn't just read from it just like that. You should make some sort of a notice. Hackers like to make a kind of something a little bit change, something that reminds you. That maybe you'll do something. You'll touch the top of the wick, and then it can make it like a little coal, which is also part of the prohibition of burning on Shabbos. So the Rambam Havi Issa D'Oraisa, according to the Maimonides, Barbie just mentioned the Maimonides. According to the Maimonides, this is a biblical prohibition to touch the wick, and it would cause a pcham, and that is if you snipe off the chard of the wick, which is according to the Rambam a prohibition. And even through a non-Jew, it's forbidden to snipe the tip of a wick, because again, that causes some sort of cham. Like, you know what happens? The wick has that little charred part on the top. So therefore, the candle one should not even the candle one should make a hecker to remind you, although it doesn't have the same concern of oil because it's solid. Nevertheless, you have to remind yourself not to touch it. Yes, Barbara.
I was just going to get some clarification. It says not to snip off the tip of the wick that's charred. They're referring to using new candles every time you light Shabbat candles, right? They're not referring to because obviously you're not going to adjust this during Shabbat.
Well, the concern is that you may just, we're talking about a person who's trying to read or use the candle, and you may end up through movement or something, cut off the wick and cause the charred part to be created and come off, and that would be prohibited on Shabbos.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So like
Yeah.
the wick burning down, the
Yeah.
burnt down
And
part of wick.
so you may kind of play with it, trying to move it, and it's going to cause you to do something which is biblical prohibition. The rabbis are
Okay.
concerned, of course, that when you're concentrating on something like this, your awareness of the Shabbos may be lacking, and therefore you may do something that if you were more. Therefore, he points out the concept of iyun ksas that requires concentration. While you're concentrating, you're going to not pay attention or forgetful about Shabbos. Again, obviously, the question is about lamps, which doesn't have the concern of the oil or the wick. I'm talking about the electric lamps. But again, the question would always be of adjustment of electricity, what have you. Whether if you have those candles, those lamps that are you could make more intense, more bright, or of course turning on and off the light, etc. So those things, for instance, till today we have some people have in their homes or in shuls for sure, where they'll have different reminders, heker, by the switches. So they'll put either little plastic or magnet connected kind of pieces that would cover the switch. Again, these are all things to remind us. A lot of people don't pay attention while they're on the move because of habit, whether it's people go out of the restroom and turn off the light, or go out of a bedroom and turn off the light and are not paying attention what they're doing. So some people in their homes will have, definitely you see it more in shuls, will have things that block the ability to just casually turn on and off a light.
Yeah, a dimmer switch. I had to get a clarification from the rabbi because I have a dimmer switch and my light in my living room area. And he said, no, that's the same as if you turn it on and off because you're increasing the brightness of it.
Yeah.
So
Okay, so let's do the footnotes on this law. Oil lamps. He says, even if the oil lamp is placed very high and it's quite inaccessible, the Taz and Bir Halacha say you should not stand under a oil lamp and look at it in a way of even casual concentration, because you may be forgetful, you may reach up. Obviously, if it's totally unreachable, something else. But he's talking about when it's high and it's not quite, and it's not quite in, and it's quite, and even if it's quite inaccessible, it's not 100% inaccessible. Okay, number two is what's it mean by concentration? Reading portions of the prayers that are somewhat familiar to you is permitted. So if you're reading something that you kind of sometimes when we read a lot of we read the prayers of the Tehillim over and over again, you just need to see kind of the structure of the words because you've said it so many times. So that's different than, let's say, reading a book or reading something that you haven't read before, where it's something new, it's fresh and new information. You may be concentrating and need to read it better, and you may adjust the light. Number three is so it says this is a rabbinic list. You forget that and tilt the lamp and draw the way closer to the wick, thereby violating the deraisa of the prohibition. The deraisa refers to something that is prohibited by Torah. Number four is if you have two people, most posts can permit this only for such reading that is a mitzvah, such as Torah study or reciting Tehillim. This is from the Magen Avram, Pri Megadim, and Mishnah Brura, that even if you have two people together, that they could remind each other, they shouldn't be just reading anything, like an ingredient or instructions, etc., but something that's connected to Torah, to Torah study. In the case where present day candles, he says in number 5, candles of superior quality are permitted, for they never need adjustment. The Mishnah Berurah says. We're obviously talking about the question is what type of candle. Something that does not need any adjustment for the light. So again, this is the question of electricity. Electricity doesn't need adjustment unless, like you're saying, Barbara, about the dimmer. But if you have just an on and on switch, so as long as you don't need to move the light then it's obviously different. So it's according to the Mishnah Berurah that qualities of superior quality is permitted. Number 6 is it says in which the wax is or tara or dur to the wicks is permitted. He says number 6. Many poskim disagree with the difference. What the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch is saying here, that a candle is different than an oil lamp, and therefore, as long as you make a small hecker, you make a small reminder, it would be permitted. So it says like this: many poskim disagree, the Vilna Gaon, and it should be avoided where there is no particular necessity, says the Magen Avram, Mishnah Berurah. All the poskim agree that wax and tallow candles are prohibited for reading in the synagogue or in public places. Candles are prohibited for reading in the synagogue or in other public places, the Pri Megadim. So in the public place, I guess because there's more people and maybe someone would move it, so then there's more concern. So then everyone agrees you shouldn't use a wax candle, or when they like they used to use if they used the fats, etc. Number 7 is the Rambam talking about cutting off the wick, that a person may cut off the wick, the charred part of the wick. This prohibition is called misakin mana, fixing a utensil, says the Vilna Gaon. It means when you're fixing the candle. So this is a prohibition only when part of the charred wick is sniped off, but if the piece of the charcoal on top is removed without removing a piece of the wick, there's no transgression. However, since most likely a piece of the wick will be removed, many posts can prohibit this, and this is our custom. So the Mishnah Berurah says that the concern is the actual cutting off from the wick, but and if you have that little kind of just the charred little charcoal on top, it's most poskim say that's not considered cutting off the wick, but still it may be a little bit of the wick is going to come off with that, so therefore you should avoid as well. Okay, so this again. So for instance, we have a lot of questions. A lot of these questions apply till today. For instance, if someone has a bed lamp or a they have even today the kind of lamps that are literally attached to your bed, not just on the side of your bed, for reading. People like to have reading when they're able to read at night. So obviously you have to make sure that we're talking about a situation that's not going to come. You can't come to by mistake in adjusting it, turn on and off the electricity, or even adjusting the level of the electricity. Okay. Next law is Asr liftoach delas oy chalon neged ner hadoyle kishu karv lehem. Now the question is, this is also something that is a common occurrence, is if you open the door when there's a fire burning or a lamp burning, right, and then that causes the wind, either it's going to have an effect on the candles one way or the other. So it says, you cannot open a door or a window next to the fire when it's burning, when it's close by. Because you may put out the fire by opening the window or closing the door or opening the door. And then, although you're not directly putting out the fire, but you're causing the fire to go out, which is a prohibition on Shabbos. Sorry, but if you have a window that's already open and the fire is burning, and now you want to close the window, let's say you're in the summer or something, or the winter, and you want to close the windows or the doors. So if it's already open, so then it's permitted to close the door or the candle. Obviously, you have to be careful. Sometimes the closing it also with the wind could cause it to go out. What about an oven that has fire burning and you want to close the oven? Aser bein liftoch bein lisko. You can't open the oven or close the oven if the fire is on. Because by doing so, the fire is either increased or extinguished, right? So if you can open the fire, the wind can come in and blow out the fire. If you're closing it, it's going to intensify the fire. So because of that, you can now allow to open or close. Therefore, these things, again, a lot of these questions, we're gonna try to get to some of the relative questions to today's situation. But first of all, when I was growing up in when I was growing up in New York, I mean, I was in Seattle, but we were in Yeshiva in New York. I don't know if they still have them today, but the ovens that we had, even the oven itself was actually wasn't electric, was a gas oven. So you had a fire burning. So if a person, you have to be careful opening and closing the oven. If it could, and that's applicable also if you're gonna actually put out the fire, it could be applicable to Chag also. So you have to be careful when you're opening and closing. I mean, electricity, you're not going to put out the fire, but definitely the problem of increasing is an issue. And also when you open an electric oven, if it's set at a certain temperature, it turns the electricity on because it brings in cold air. So it's also kind of similar. So he says over here, it's forbidden to open the door and the window directly opposite and close to a burning candle. So he says number 8 is what's the concern? So he says the concern is for the wind from outside may blow out the candle by opening the window. This is forbidden even this is forbidden even to open the door slowly. Because slowly, means it's not that the actual movement of the door is going to put out the candle, but by opening up slowly, nevertheless, the wind will come in from the outside. So says the Magen Avram, Eliyahu Rabbah, and Chai Adam. Where there's no wind blowing, what happens if it's just not a windy or it's very, very kind of still outside? The Mishnah Berurah rules that you may be lenient, provided you open the door slowly so not to use the wind of the opening, so as not to create a draft that could blow out the candles. This is something especially we're more careful with, for instance, on Hanukkah, where we put the candles mamish by the window or by the door. That's also you have to be very careful with that as well. Okay, footnote number 9 is nice to be the flame be extinguished. So he says the Marsha, Mesachah Shabbos 120 says that it is almost certain that the candle will blow out. So it's not a question of, you can't say, well, it's not. He says, and again, this is a question going back to footnote number 8, in a situation where there's no wind at all. Number 10 is, but it's permitted to close the door or window even in such circumstances. Number 10 is even if closing the door removes the source of wind and the fire is extinguished. He says, the Mishnah Berurah says, even if some way or another that he said, even if the closing the door removes the source of wind and the fire is extinguished because of that, it's still permitted to close the door. Doesn't explain exactly why. Number 11, he says, what about a fire, an oven that the fire is still on? In the case of smoldering coals, which means the coals are already totally almost out, opening the oven door is unanimously prohibited. And most poskim agree that closing it is also prohibited. Because again, when you open it, the wind comes in and fans the coals and it definitely starts a fire again. Smoldering coals, okay. Number 12 is, by doing so, the fire is either increased or extinguished by the oven. It says this may also apply to modern thermostat, right? Controlled gas or electric ovens, where opening and closing the oven door has an almost immediate effect on the intensity of the flame or the electric. Competent halachic authorities should be consulted in the case of an electric oven or I guess he means, or even a gas-controlled oven, about these situations. Again, you have sometimes people that will have, for instance, you have a few questions. There's certain ovens that have oven Shabbos mode today. Today, actually, they have what's called Shabbos mode in ovens themselves. That's made like they have also fridges that have Shabbos mode. The same question really comes to a fridge about opening and closing a fridge. Some people are careful because when you open and close the fridge, it causes the electricity, the motor to start running when there's a warm draft comes in to a fridge or freezer, causes the fridge or freezer to start running, the motor to start running again. So the same question, if you're talking about an electric oven, it's not just the heat, but we're talking about the actual thermostat will change to cause the motor to go on. Yes, Rebecca. You're on mute.
Hi. So with the fridge, like what are you gonna do about that? Because like you don't have to use an oven on Shabbos, but you have to use a fridge and you have to open it to get your food. So what are you supposed to do about the fact that when you open the door to let in cold air, it might start the motor running?
Okay, so number one is there's the obvious question about a fridge, which is the light. Fridge and freezer have light, so one has to make sure that there's no way around that. If you have a fridge or freezer that has the light opens and closes when you open and close the freezer or fridge, you have to disconnect the bulb, or some people use tape, a strong Scotch tape that will hold the piece that's kind of a switch in the fridge or freezer, so the light will stay off at all times. Today, again, I believe that a lot of the modern, more up-to-date electric appliances, both ovens and fridges, have what's called Shabbos mode. Even the natural brands that are out there today have Shabbos mode in them. Some of them have more modern technology. Some of them just have little plastic pieces, depending on the machine. But I believe also in the fridge, they have Shabbos mode for the fridge. Now, about your question, the fridge, some people are more careful than others. Some people actually, I heard someone say, I don't know the source of this, that the Rebbe actually never used to close his fridge 100%, not because of the light, obviously, but because of the draft. So some people are more careful. Again, I believe modern fridges today have a Shabbos mode built into the computer system. And I think it's not just connected to the light. I think it's also connected to the thermostat. Now, again, it's not exactly a fire, right? He says if you saw in footnote number 12, we said in the case of an electric appliance, a competent halachic authority should be consulted. He's not saying obviously that electric fire, because then it's really, you're not causing, it's gramakan, it's not 100%, even though it could be sekresha, but it's not 100% like a fire. I don't, but some people are more careful than others about keeping the fridge open. Yes, Barbara.
Yeah, I have an issue with my refrigerator because I bought a brand new refrigerator just a year or so ago, and there's no button in there. And I didn't realize it didn't have a button or the bulb that I could turn off. And I've called the manufacturer and they said, well, it doesn't have a button. And I've got to figure out how to get in there and get at the bulb, because obviously it's got to have some way to get the vent off or whatever.
Can I interrupt for a second?
Sure.
So
Sure.
there's, with a lot of these like very modern fridges, you can buy like a magnet that's like the shape of a coin or a quarter, and you put it on the panel on top, and somehow that stops that turns the light off. I guess it disrupts whatever the process is in there. Another thing you could do is go on YouTube and search like, how do I turn off the light in the model, whatever fridge?
Oh, I
And
did
you'll
that,
see
and I couldn't find it, but
nothing there.
it
Or search online, because I'm sure like plenty of other people have that question, but try
the
the
coin.
magnet that's like the shape of a coin. Try that.
Can you send that to me in chat, please?
Sure. Okay.
So I just want to say about the magnet. We had a new fridge in the last place we lived in that didn't have, we couldn't figure out the Shabbos mode, or it didn't have Shabbos mode, and we also couldn't undo the light bulb. It was like almost impossible. And so we had the magnet thing, but the problem with the magnet was, so you put the magnet usually is on the top. So there's a little metal, you'll see that there's a metal, the two, like that you don't recognize it as a magnet, because there has to be some sort of technology that recognizes when the door is open and closed. So it's some sort of magnetic thing, and doesn't just turn on and off the light, it also turns on and off a whole bunch of things that are going on. If you leave the fridge open, it starts an alarm. There's a lot of other technologies that are that are built into the fridge if it's open. And to close it and turn off all that electric is also prohibited on Shabbos. So we
Um,
did go ahead.
oh, sorry. No, I don't want to interrupt when you're finished.
So we did do the issue. We did figure out the idea with the magnet, and you can't just get any magnet. We bought like these super strong magnets you could get like in a hardware store. We put it on top. It worked for a while, and then we had the problem where the magnet itself would kind of move around and it wasn't 100%. So you have to really like test and trial it. At the end, we had to put very strong tape to hold the magnet in place to make sure that it doesn't move around and adjust. Yes, Rebecca.
Also, I saw recently that in order to deal with this issue, I don't know if it's the Star K or some organization in Israel named like Somet or something like that that deals with like technology and halacha, but they basically came up with the help of like GE or some other company. They came up with this box, this like device that you attach to, you leave it on top of the fridge, and there's a way to like connect it to the wiring of the fridge, and basically it leaves the light on the whole time even when your fridge door is closed. So I can also try to find out for you, Barbara, how to get that. But maybe Barbara, if you could send me the brand and model of your fridge. I know a lot of people, so I can ask if anybody has a way to deal with that
Okay.
particular fridge.
Yeah, it's a Whirlpool. I really like it. I was really happy with it. So,
But
okay.
yeah, and you could check again if this. I'm almost sure that a lot of the main brands like Whirlpool or whatever, they have a Shabbos mode. They have like it's not something that it's not something that you're familiar with, but it's like some sort of code that you push this button and that button and it turns off the lights.
Okay, I'll check.
I had a fridge that had that you had again if you don't know how to do it, there's no way you would figure it out, but there's some sort of built-in hidden code that you with the button
Okay.
that will tell you push this button that's up and that button and the cool button. But it's just again they put in a special technology for the Shabbos observant people that will turn on and off go into Shabbos mode. And like for
Okay.
instance, the fridge I had recently also did that, and when we got into the Shabbos mode. It turned the whole thing into Shabbos mode it turn itself off after 24 hours. And you had a way to do it like for Yom Tiv. So they had a way to do it for 24 hours, for 36 hours, for 72 hours. So you could adjust according to how long you needed to go into that kind of Shabbos Yom Tiv mode. But again, I'm
Okay.
quite certain it could be that Whirlpool has that. And you just have to check what the code is to get that done. Usually they'll have someone on YouTube that will teach. I remember literally it can be complicated. Something push this button 3 times, hold it for 30 seconds, then let it go and push that button. Not like it's a whole shtick that they built
Yeah.
in only for those who are in the know that will help you turn
I
on and
should
off.
have made sure it had a Shabbat mode, but I just assumed it would and never assume anything. So,
Okay,
okay.
so
Can
Yeah.
I
that
ask can I ask you a question about something else?
sure, go ahead.
Um, so not to be a troublemaker, but um there was like an issue in my apartment building with the lights in the stairwell. When a person walks in the stairwell, they go from dim to bright. And I asked Shyla about that because it was like really upsetting me that every time I go in the stairwell, it's like
Mhm.
messing with the lights. So I asked Shyla, and I was told that first of all that it's okay for several reasons, but also that an LED light is not the same as like a regular light, and therefore um it's not, of course the person should do their best not to cause an LED light to turn on, but that if someone does, that it's not the same kind of avera as someone turning on a bulb. Is that
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, again, you have other people have like uh, you have things that are like people have in like I've seen it in Seattle a lot where you like in kind of very dark places, they're not always does it have outside light from the street light. We'll have sensors that as soon as you walk
Yeah,
past the lights go on. So
right.
again, there's a certain concept where a person just does, you can't things are happening around you according to Shabbos. There's no kavanah, there's no intention. There's a lot of Shabbos is broken down to a lot of details in the laws of Melachos. If you're benefiting, you're trying to do something, here you're not doing anything. It's not like you just happen to be walking. Again, these things apply to a lot of questions. If you're staying in a hotel, a lot of hotels will have electric. The doors open automatically when you walk in. You're staying there for Shabbos. So a lot of these questions come up in modern technology. I know in Eretz Yisrael, obviously they've disqualified these things when it comes to Shabbos. They don't have the electric doors, and they have Shabbos keys for Shabbos. Like if you go into a hotel today and you have and today they have all the doors are electronic, even the doors of your bedroom that you rented. So you have, it makes things difficult. In Yerushalayim, obviously they give keys. I believe still, I haven't been in a hotel here in Yerushalayim for a while for Shabbos, but I think still give out keys because otherwise you can't use the credit cards, the electric cards for Shabbos. So all these things come into play. And yeah, today technology is all around us. You could be walking somewhere and it just the sensors go off all over the place. So there's a concept where you're just doing your thing. You're not looking to turn on and off sensors. If you're walking the stairwell. It's nothing. You have no intention. You're not involved at all in the lighting. The lighting is kind of happening on its own. Although you're you're causing it to happen. So there are questions about that. Okay, so
but am I correct that turning on an LED, causing an LED light to turn on is not the same?
that I'm not familiar with. Again,
Ah,
LED lights, I'm not familiar. If they obviously whoever told you that has checked into the question of LED lights versus regular lights as far as electricity goes. I'm not familiar with that technology to know that LED is different than, let's say, a regular bulb.
Bulb. Okay.
Okay, so it says over here like this. This is definitely not part of what we're trying to do here. So he says like this. Okay, here's another question. Aser la'ares roitev reiseach achatichas lechem oi matzos. Okay, here goes. Now we're going to the difficult questions of bishul achar bishul, of foods that have already been cooked. Like for instance, you have bread. The bread has already been baked, or the matzah has already been baked. And let's say you want to dip or pour, right? Let's say there's a dish, you have, let's say, like a crate, and you pour hot sauce on it, or hot gravy on it, right? Like a mushroom gravy that's boiling hot. So are you allowed to do that on Shabbos? If you're not cooking the bread, in theory, the bread has already been baked. So this is the complicated laws of bishul on Shabbos. Again, we have for instance, we're going to go into a few things. I'm going to just read this law, and then maybe from there we'll go to some of the side notes, because we have the question of that we all deal with all the time. For instance, coffee making, tea making, salting your foods, chicken soup, etc. Hot foods, having certain foods on a single plate, right? Cholent, which is usually pretty steaming hot. And what's the law of cholent? Is it a liquid? Is it a solid? Together with with chicken or if you have coleslaw that has liquids that could get heated up by the cholent, which is a solid. So these things are constantly happening. But the salt question, what type of salt? There are different types of salts that have different kind of different concerns, whether it's sea salt, boiled sea salt, which is known as table salt, or rock salt. A lot of people want rock salt. Is it the same, etc.? So here, let's see. It says, it's prohibited to pour boiling gravy. So the gravy obviously was, let's say, left on a blech before Shabbos. It's very hot. And you want to pour it on a piece of bread or matzah. So it's prohibited. First, pour the hot gravy into a plate. So it's already not in the, it's not, so again, there's kli rishon, sheni, and shlishi. And then there's iri, kli rishon, kli sheni. You have what's called pouring, and you have the direct heat. So let's say you have a chicken soup that's on the blech. So the chicken soup itself, the soup sitting in the pot, that's the kli rishon, that's the first vessel. So here you have it. You shouldn't first pour it into a kaira, which is a plate, which is now, that's the second vessel, right? And now, not just right away, but viskar ktsas, it should cool down a drop or a little bit. Achi roy lachila, it shouldn't be boiling hot, it should be edible. It means it's no longer boiling hot. Then you should put the bread inside it if you want to have that combination. or hamatzah, or the matzah. As long as the gravy is boiling, even if it's now no longer in the kli rishon, in the first vessel, it's in the kli sheni, in the kaira, in the plate. You cannot put in the bread or the matzah. So too applies. Do not place salt, tavlin, or other spices, the into this gravy. Even again, if it's in the it's in the kli rish, in the sheni. And surely you cannot salt the pot. So if you have the chicken soup in the pot and you never removed it yet from the first pot into, let's say, the bowl would be the clean sheni, the second vessel. So surely you're not allowed to put in the salt there as well. As long as it's boiling hot. It has to be that it's no longer boiling and edible. Now, so seemingly that means all salt. Now he makes a distinction. Again, this is obviously the question of bishul bishul, other questions where the salt was. So again, we have three types of salt that we basically have, right? We have rock salt, which is basically a deposit, whatever, from ancient times, that there's a concentrate of salt that's a deposit, like most American salts in the Midwest, in Kentucky and all that places. That's rock salt. But for instance, Salt Lake City in Utah, which is a big source of salt in America, that's like a sea salt, where the actual, it's from the waters that evaporate. So the question is if it's rock salt or sea salt. So here is a third type. He says, the salt itself is not, say, regular sea salt, let's say out of Egypt or other hot places. It's the salt is made by evaporation. So the salt water is kind of the pools of salt water from the sea. The water evaporates from the sun and leaves a hard crust. That's like the Dead Sea, right? The Dead Sea is not boiled salt, but it's not rock salt either. It's sea salt. So the sun evaporates and then has the remainder is the salt. Then there's the boiled salt that you're boiling to make it salt. That's the table salt. So here he says is yesh makil, and there's those who are lenient. A person who is more strict on that as well, it will be blessed. If, let's say, you have a pre-made hot boiling coffee and tea made already, right? Some people, you have the pot, let's say the urn sitting on a blech that's boiling hot, and you have a cup that you're going to drink the coffee in, but the cup has already sugar inside. So when you pour iru, you have to remember this in the laws of heat on Shabbos. So we have kli rishon, which means even after it's taken off the fire, the actual where the original receptacle is of the heat, let's say like the pot of soup. Then you have irui kli rishon, which would be, for instance, you have an urn that was on the fire, and then you pour it into the second cup. So it's when it hits the second cup, it hasn't settled in the second cup yet. It's being poured from the first cup, so it's not from the first vessel. So it's not as if it's in the first vessel, but it's still hotter than it's in the second vessel. So here you have the sugar ready sitting in the second vessel, but it's being poured on from the first vessel. So he says that's prohibited. So what should you do? So instead of pouring the coffee on the sugar, is coffee vati. First pour the tea of the coffee from the first pot into the cup. And then you place the sugar in it, so the liquid is already sitting in the second cup, and it's not being poured from the first cup, which is considered a more intense heat than once it's already been settled into the second cup. But for whatever reason, whatever that means, in a case of necessity, whatever that means, then we could be lenient. So let's first learn the footnotes over here. We have some time. We're going to read a bit about what we're talking about. So here we have. It's forbidden to pour the gravy onto the bread and the matzah. It says the author holds the stringent view of the Yerim and the Smag, who maintain that the prohibition of cooking on Shabbos applies also to food that was already baked. So here we have baked bread. So what are we concerned about? You can't cook the bread. The bread's already been cooked. So why are we concerned to pour the hot gravy? So here he's holding the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, when he says the author means the Kitzur, holds of this different views, but the view of the Arim and the Smag, that it's prohibited to they maintain that the prohibition of cooking on Shabbos applies also to foods that has already been baked. Okay, number 14 is okay. So he says over here, so what should you do? You should first pour the gravy into a dish, which is the klisheni, and then wait till it cools, fit to eat. So what does it mean? What's this idea of waiting for it to cool, fit to eat? So he says like this: the gravy must be significantly cooled off so that the person's hand will not recoil when touching it. It's called yad selah this way. If something's so hot that you're uncomfortable to touch it, then that's still a problem. This is called yad seiledes. We are not sure as to the extent as the exact temperature of yad seiledes. What is the actual temperature of yad seiledes? Is it just any person themselves, or is there a set temperature that says that the person's hand, yad seiledes means, again, the person will recoil their hand because it's too hot, right? You touch if you were to put if you take a piece of chicken, for instance, a solid, and you take it out of the original pot, the pan that it was made in, and you put it onto your plate, it's still boiling hot, especially a solid. So you're gonna you're recoiling your hand. But what is that actual temperature? That's called yad seiledes. So he says we don't know exactly the temperature of yad seiledes. So he says, but it is approximately 45 degrees Celsius or 113 degrees Fahrenheit, which is much lower than what you're cooking at. I think people who are baking, let's say cooking meat or chickens, try to reach the 130 degrees, right? So he says, Fahrenheit. According to Rav Moshe Feinstein, it is 43 degrees Celsius and 110 to 160 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm not sure that 160 is much hotter. In this halacha, the author follows the Ramah 3:18:5. You should therefore not put soup nuts into soup or dip bread into cholent, again, which are very hot, if the soup or the cholent are yad seiledes 45 degrees Celsius. So if, let's say, again, so the question is, we have baked goods, right? So you have soup bits. Can you put those bits into the soup if it's still at a 45 degrees Celsius or hotter? He says you should not. If you did, you may eat it even if you put the bread into the pot itself. Says the Klid Rishon, see Mishnah Berurah. But you shouldn't do it. But if you did it with the Eved, even if you placed bread indirectly into the first pot, at the end of the day you can still eat it. Yes, Rebecca.
Let's say you're heating up soup from before Shabbos I use something called a hot mat. It's like a heating element, whatever. And then I'm also heating up noodles. The noodles are warm separately. So does it matter if I first put the noodles in the bowl or first put the soup in the bowl? It's not boiling. I really don't think it's yad seiledes, Bo. It's not that hot.
Again, listen. Today, I don't know how you could figure. I'm not sure how you could figure out 45 degrees on Shabbos. Maybe there's Shabbos permitted temperatures, thermometers that could do it, or if it's just an assumption, 45 degrees Celsius. If it's based on what he's bringing here, quoting here from Rav Moshe Feinstein, it seems clear that's not one of these things that you just assume. Obviously, everyone could tell if something is warm or hot. But what's considered hot and what's considered casual hot, you have people that will drink tea and coffee at a much hotter degree than other people, right? So the question is, it's not just in theory, yad seiledes, this should be a general tolerance, but they've placed actually an established agreed heat, whatever it is, 43 or 45 degrees. So that all depends. Again, if it's under 45 or 43 degrees, according to the Ramesh Feinstein, under 43 degrees, so then it's not a problem. If it's above 45 degrees, then putting lakshan, noodles, or soup bits is a problem. And again, then there's also the problem if the noodles are, see, bread and soup nuts are dry. Noodles sometimes are wet because they were made initially in water and they could be kept in some sort of liquid where they're not 100% dry. And usually, again, when it comes to noodles, to be 100% dry is usually not a good thing. because then it gets sticky and stuff. So if you go to a house, the noodles will be still a bit moist, and that water on the noodles is also a problem. More of a problem than, let's say, the soup nuts and the bread. So again, if it's not yatsu ledisbo, then that's not a problem. But if again, you have to check what's yatsu ledisbo. I mean,
But let's say it's not, then does it
that's
matter
not a
if you
problem.
first?
If it's not a problem.
No, but
Again,
I'm just asking,
the
like,
bread or the noodles have been cooked. You're not cooking. The question is if it's considered bishul, if it's already been baked and cooked.
so then if it's not yatsola dispo, then it doesn't matter if you first put in the soup or first put in the noodles.
If it's for somewhere or another coming, you mean because it's an iri kli rishon that's not yatsa ledisbo, that we're going to learn about. If it's, we're going to see that in a second about if the pot
Okay.
itself is not really so hot in the first place. Okay.
Okay.
So here we have over here. Now he says, what is considered a? However, as long as the gravy is hot, even if it's in a dish, which is the klisheni. Again, the klisheni is kli rishon is, he says, what is the pot in which it is cooked is called the kli rishon. The pot of soup that you boiled and made the soup in and then kept it on the blech, that is the kli rishon. That's what's called, rishon means the first. That's the first vessel. The bowl in which it is poured is called kli sheni. So if you take it and you pour it into the bowl, now the bowl is a kli sheni. Is called a kli sheni. The third vessel into which it is poured is called kli shlishi. If you pour it from there into a second bowl, will be a kli shlishi. Now, what happens is, again, with the question of salt, everyone agrees a kli shlishi is not mevashel. If it's a kli shlishi, it doesn't cook in liquids. The question is, some people hold that the ladle is its own vessel. So if you can, let's say, take soup and take it out with the ladle, so the ladle will be already the kli sheni, and the bowl will be the kli shlishi. Or some people want to say that the spoon itself, the spoon is the kli shlishi, because if the blade, if for whatever reason, I'm not sure how the spoon is less of is obviously less of a kli than the ladle. The ladle could hold within it a proper amount of soup, but again, it's definitely significantly cooled down when it's in the spoon. So all these questions we'll see hopefully over time when we get into a little more of the commentaries. Number 16, he says, so if he says like this, however, as long as the gravy is hot, even if it's in the dish, which is the klisheni, the second vessel, it's still forbidden to put the bread and to put in bread or matzah. So he says number 16, this is the Pri Megadim rules, that it is better not to put bread, etc., into a vessel that is on the fire, even if it is cooler than yatsu ledis. Okay, so this is kind of addressing your question. So he says that the Pri Megadim says that if you have, let's say, the bowl of soup that's on the fire, he says that into a vessel that is on the fire, but it's whatever, it's still not hot. It's not the liquid is still not boiling. You still should not place in the bread because it's on the fire, or the bits, I guess, in the matzah into the kli rishon. Okay, number 17 is said you should also not pour salt or spices into a hot gravy, even if it's the dish kli sheni, and surely not into a kli rishon as long as it's hot. So you surely should not put salt into the original pot of soup, right, to salt the soup, or even into your kli sheni if it's still boiling hot. So now let's see the law over here. The footnotes. Regarding putting raw food into a kli rishon, the Magen Avram 3:18-8 is machmer stringent even when the kli rishon is off the fire and even if it's not yatsu ledis. So let's say you want to put in raw, anything could be raw food, vegetables, etc., to put it into let's say the soup that was actually on the fire, you taken it off the fire, the soup is still in the pot, even though it's below 45 degrees, you should still not put in uncooked foods. The Mishnah Brura is lenient in the case when the kli rishon is removed from the fire and is not yatsu ledis. So if you took the soup off the fire and cooled in the pot, so the Mishnah Brura, the Chavetz Chaim is makel to put in raw foods. The Yerim rules that easily cooked foods like onions, etc., may not be put into a kli sheni when it's yatzer ledus. So if you have easily cooked foods, like he calls onions easily cooked foods for whatever reason, so then if you put that into, you have a boiling kli sheni, so it's not the kli rishon, you already put it into the bowl, you still should not put it in. And since we are not experts in knowing what is considered easily cooked, you should not put any raw food into a kli sheni. So here he's saying you should be more strict. That when it comes to kli sheni, again, the kli sheni is the second vessel. For instance, you have the urn, let's say the electric urn that goes into a cup. The cup is the kli sheni. We don't make tea until we make it into kli shlishi, until a third vessel. And since we're not experts in knowing what's considered easily cooked, you should not put raw food into a kli sheni at all. That is yatzer ledus, that is boiling hot. Obviously, once it cools down, it's differently. Chai Adam and Magen Avram agree with the Yarim in this. Number 18 is like this: if the salt is processed through boiling. So he says the Mishnah Berurah rules that salt, which is processed by boiling, may be put into a kli sheni, even if it's yatzer ledus, but it should not be put into a kli rishon. So boiled salt, which I believe most table salt today is considered boiled salt. So then you could, according to the Mishnah Berurah, you could actually pour table salt onto soup that's already into a kli sheni, which would be your bowl. No one eats soup out of the original pot, right? Number 19. But one who's strict, he says, the Ramah says, this refers to regularly mined salt. It's not referring to boiled salt. Okay, number 20 is talking about pouring onto the sugar. So he says like this: the reason is that since sugar is usually eaten in its dissolved state, it is not considered thoroughly cooked until it is dissolved. And thus you are cooking it by pouring the boiling water. I mean, people don't just have spoonfuls. I mean, most people don't have spoonfuls of salt. You wait till it dissolves. So you're actually completing the process by pouring the hot water on top of it. And thus you are cooking it by pouring the boiling water. The Maram Shik says that. According to Siddur Atanya, which means the Alter Rebbe in the Siddur, the reason is that that sugar dissolves before it cooks, and therefore has a law of a liquid, which is even when previously cooked may not be recooked. Means there's a question of bishul acher bishul. Can you recook something? If it's a solid, it's different. If it's a liquid, liquids can be cooked again, but because the sugar dissolves before it's cooked, then it really has a law of a liquid, and therefore it's a problem. This reason may apply to salt processed through boiling, and probably is the reason why the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch is machmir regarding salt. So again, the same question is salt. Salt is also liquid. So if it turns the same idea, if it dissolves and turns to liquid, so then again, even if it's boiled salt, you should be machmir. Okay. 21 is, and we're going to stop here and then open for questions. 21 is when there's a necessity, whatever that means. So he says, if you already did it, that's what would be a necessity. But you already did it. You may drink the tea or coffee if you already poured the tea and coffee onto the sugar, even if it is not a necessity. In other words, you can make other cups of tea. So what's the necessity? Let's say that's your last cup of tea. So that's obviously different than if you have more tea. But he says even if you made it and you do have more tea, you could be lenient as well. Since some poskim permitted even initially. See this general rule in Magen Avram 254:11 and Chai Adam 9:11. Okay, I know we've gone through quickly some very, very basic laws. I want to go into more detail about these laws of Kli Rishon and Kli Sheni, but we'll have to do that next week. So we have, what I want to go into next week is, before we go into the question of the blech, is just to define all the questions that we talked about. The ladle, Kli Rishon, Kli Sheni, Iri Kli Rishon. Again, Iri means to pour. Kli Rishon would be the original receptacle that the thing was made in, whether it's a pot or a pan. The Kli Sheni will be the one that you place it in afterwards. What's the difference if it's a solid, if it's liquid? Pouring from a solid, from the first into a second, a Kli Shlishi, etc. I want to go next week also to the question of making this is a question that a lot of people have, which is making filtered coffee on Shabbos. So filtering liquids On Shabbos, the other things that we wanted to talk about was the types of salt. Hold on here. The types of salt that there is out there today, etc. Yes, Rebecca.
Someone I know likes to put like a tiny piece of like fresh lemon into their tea. Um, the urn that they use on Shabbos has like really, really hot water, so that is not okay to do on Shabbos, correct?
Okay, again, this is again, this is the question. The question if it's a Kli Rishon, Sheni, or Shlishi. It's not a Kli Rishon, obviously, because no one's eating it out of the Kli Rishon. In terms
No,
of,
they use
no,
the Kli
I want to give you an
Sheni.
example of a Kli Rishon that is accessible. If you have a very small, these small little coffee boilers that you actually boil on the fire, and the coffee's cooked, and you're keeping the coffee itself on the blech. Again, and it's boiling hot. That is the Kli Rishon. If you wanted to drink straight out of that, that is the Kli Rishon. If you pour when you're pouring from an urn to a cup, that's already the Kli Sheni. And if you're pouring from the cup into a third cup, the second cup, which is
That's
the
a
third
Kli
cup.
Shlishi.
Shlishi, right? So then there's different. We're going to get into that about a Kli Shlishi, putting in sugars or teas or coffees or lemons for that matter in a Kli Shlishi. Obviously, it's not the same thing as putting it into a Kli Rishon.
So it is okay?
Okay, I want to go through everything slowly because we have the questions of boiling, and when is it a problem with boiling, no matter what. So liquids are different than solids, but you have Kli Shlishi. Kli Shlishi is not mevashel, so the Kli Shlishi for sure is not going to be a problem.
Okay, because I'm not sure if it's like boiling the lemon
No, but
because the water is really
yeah,
hot.
I understand, but the liquid itself is already not in this. It's not even in the second vessel. We were discussing
Right.
now Kli
Okay.
Rishon, Kli Sheni. We didn't get to Kli Shlishi. Once it's in a Kli Shlishi, there's no opinion that cooks.
Okay.
I'm just
Wonderful.
showing you
Thank
over
you so much.
here. I just if you see over here quickly before we finish off, you have over here what's called sea salt, which is evaporated, leaving behind salt crystals. That's what we call sea salt. Rock salt is mined underground deposits of salt. That's like rock salt. You'll have that. Most salts coming out of places like Kentucky or the Midwest is rock salt. Obviously, there's no sea salt there. I do believe that in Utah, the salt that's coming out of Utah is considered sea salt. I'm almost sure. And then the boiled sea salt, which is known as table salt, so that we said is different because it's boiled. But then we brought down that the Alter Rebbe says, he quotes in the footnote that the Alter Rebbe says that if the concern is that it turns into liquid before it turns into before it's dissolved, so then it's like bishul, you're cooking the liquid, and there is bishul acher bishul. There is recooking when something is a liquid form. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to continue. We're going to actually get more deep into this next week because although this is kind of, we want to get to that later point when we learn Hilchas Shabbos, Shmir Shabbos Kehilchatah, but you can't just go through. This is something that we deal with on a weekly basis. These are questions, like you said, whether it's putting lemon in your tea, or everyone makes coffee or tea in the morning, and putting soup biscuits or noodles in your soup, and mixing cholent and liquids as a solid, etc., etc. Any other questions before we conclude tonight? All right, everyone. Thank you for joining. Meretz Hashem, we will reconvene next week. Take care. Bye, Latov.